Hello everybody and welcome to the February 20th, 2019 edition of the Ephrom Josine Show. I am your host, Ephrom Josine. I have brownie in my teeth. Anyway, I normally don't dedicate an entire episode to just one article I see. However, Matt Walsh released the first real attack on Bernie Sanders of his presidential campaign from someone I'm already kind of familiar with. Like, I could have just picked some random town hall columnist, but I went with Matt Walsh. Because he is my favorite of all the Republican columnists. I don't like him. At least not for the reasons his fans like him. Although, Matt, quite frankly, when it comes to reading, I'm probably your biggest fan. I'll give Matt this. He's never written an article that's bored me. But anyway, here is his article. This is on Bernie's 2020 campaign. Walsh. Bernie Sanders is an arrogant, power-hungry, hypocritical, cowardly, morally deranged communist. Jesus, that's a mouthful. Yesterday, Bernie Sanders officially announced his 2020 presidential bid. He promptly ranked in $6 million into campaign donations within 24 hours of the announcement. He obviously remains an immensely popular figure on the left. Even those on the right tend to attribute certain positive qualities to Sanders, like ultra integrity and honesty. I've heard some Republicans describe him as the least repulsive Democrat on a national stage. Hey, we've got something. Hardly a high honor, but I'm not sure he deserves even that much credit. Then who is the least repulsive in your opinion, Matt? Are you a Tulsi Gabbard kind of man? You strike me as a Tulsi Gabbard kind of man. Sanders is, in fact, an arrogant, power-hungry, hypocritical, cowardly, morally deranged communist. That's just the title of your article. Let's go through each one of those carefully chosen adjectives point by point. Arrogant and power-hungry. Sanders is 77 years old. Wow. If he were elected president, heaven help us, he'd be 79 on Inauguration Day. If liberals were making this point, we'd see articles nonstop about how millennials want their generation to be the only one in power, but since it's against Bernie Sanders, it's okay. There's nothing wrong with being elderly. We will all be elderly one day, except for you, Matt. You will live forever. Should we be fortunate enough to live so long. But the presidency is an enormously stressful, physically taxing, mentally draining job. There's a reason why Obama and Bush went into office as relatively young men. They were 50. They were like in their 50s, Matt. That's not relatively young. Obama, I think, was in his late 40s. That's still not relatively young. Middle age, okay, so middle age is about 39 years old. So it is impossible to have a young president, Matt. And quite frankly, I'm not convinced we should. I mean, apparently young people like your boss, and that scares me a little. And came out looking like they had life force sucked out of them by Vulture from Spider-Man. Wait, you mean over the course of 8 years they looked older? Especially at one of the biggest signs of aging in a man's life? Wow, who would have thought? Now, the only thing that happened to Bill Clinton was he just lost weight afterwards. Seriously, you ever notice that? He looked like, not particularly fat, but not like skinny. Now he's like really skinny. It's actually kind of concerning. And of course, Jimmy Carter will live forever. Presidents age in dog years. I don't think that's true. Jimmy Carter's like 95. What's that in dog years? 600 something? Jesus. Every year in office is like 7 in a civilian life. You have to be extraordinarily arrogant to think that you can effectively take on that kind of physical and mental stress at the age of 80. Isn't stuff like this what the vice president was designed for? In case the regular president couldn't do his positions? I mean, George H.W. Bush did that pretty well. At least in terms of following through the Reagan agenda. His policies were still atrocious, but that's another story. You have, you have to be extraordinarily power hungry to want it. I'm sure Matt Walsh does not want any kind of power at all, by the way. The problem with presidents is that they want so badly to be president. Imagine Matt Walsh as an employer. He'd just say, listen. The problem with my employees is they want to do their job. We need people who don't want to do their job. There hasn't been a reluctant leader in the White House since at least Coolidge. That power-hungry Dwight D. Eisenhower. All of them since that point, and most of them before it, have desperately desired to be the most powerful men on earth. Not most before it. I mean, the first president to take any sort of international affair approach was really Theodore Roosevelt. Maybe you could argue McKinley. And you could make a weak argument towards Monroe, considering the Monroe Doctrine, but we had no power to enforce it. I just don't get this argument. A few of them have been pretty good at their job in spite of their character flaws that promote them to pursue it. It is understandable. Though, for a young man to have such blind ambitions... Again, 50 is not young, Matt! Jesus. But a man or woman who is still gasping for the throne even in his final years of life? Someone who will pursue power even if it literally kills him? Oh my God, that tyrant George Washington! He attempted to lead the colonies despite the fact the British could have killed him at any moment. What do you mean that sounds very stupid? This whole argument's stupid. I'm not even bothering to make a good comparison. We should be very suspicious of such a person. Hypocritical. Sanders has been living on the public dime for 40 years. That's a weird way to say he's been winning elections for 40 years. During that time as a public servant, why'd you put that in quotes? That's just objectively what he's called. He has managed to amass a fortune and a 7-figure income that puts him firmly in the same 1% camp he has spent decades decrying, because he's not against people earning money in itself. He hasn't cashed in on his political career to the same extent as, say, Hillary Clinton, but he is no middle-class champion. While lambasting income inequality and railing against the evils of capitalism, Sanders has done quite a bit of capitalizing himself. That's just a bad pun and you should feel bad. Indeed, he just bought his third house recently. That was like 3 years ago. That's not recent. Even then, he's the poorest member of the Senate, and it's only his third house because his second one was passed down to his wife, and is actually a fairly modest house. A modest little $600,000 lakefront property in Vermont. I believe Americans are entitled to buy as many houses as they can afford and make as much money as the market allows. First off, the first part Sanders is fine with. I don't know, did he contradict his Two Houses Tops Act? Did I forget about that? But I also believe in consistency. Someone who lectures others about greed and deliberately fosters hatred and suspicion towards the wealthy with overheated class warfare rhetoric, because the wealthy should never be criticized, cannot buy 3 homes and collect millions in book royalties without being guilty of rank hypocrisy. Okay, even if Sanders was a socialist, which he's not, by the way, socialists aren't typically just against people earning money, assuming they actually put in the entire work. Sanders made a lot of money off of a book he wrote. He wrote it, therefore, under socialism, he'd still be okay to sell it and make money off of it because he put his labor into it. Now, I'm not a socialist, for the record. I don't think that's a good model for society. However, I at least have talked to socialists in the past, and by the way, a lot of socialists don't particularly care for him, but that's a side note. And he sort of just hammers that point in for a good paragraph. Cowardly. Sanders has earned a reputation as a scrappy freedom fighter who stands up against the dark, powerful forces in our country. He is about as convincing in this role as a blue-collar hero. It takes no courage for a Democrat to pump his fist and shout about Wall Street or corporations. He risks nothing with this kind of sloganeering, but there are dark and powerful forces in his own party. He should know about those forces since they rigged the primary against him in 2016. Yet, in the end, Sanders still bowed to the Clinton machine, kissed the ring, and played nice. Yeah, to prevent Donald from getting into office. Which didn't work. Honest to God, the rest of this article is just the same points that have been debunked time and time again, so, you know what? I'm not even bothering. This doesn't deserve it. I made it halfway through. I'm Ephrom, and good night.